So this is a part of our last presentation, which is knowing and loving God. So obviously, the first part of knowing and loving God is knowing God. And you can see from our group that you probably now know a lot more about God than you did before we began. Isn't that true? You can start to see a lot of God's personality and nature. You can start to see in the principles how God feels about things. So isn't that wonderful? So that these principles can expose more and more of God's nature to you. So that's the first thing I'd like to remind you of. And remember, a person who wants to know and love someone automatically wants a relationship, you see. So many of you have not really engaged this relationship with God very much because you haven't really known God's personality and nature very much. Now, the way I discovered God's personality and nature in the first century was by having the relationship. But unfortunately for many of you, you haven't got enough trust in God yet to even have the relationship. And so you haven't come to know God by God telling you about God. So what you've needed is someone like myself to come along and explain to you different aspects of God's personality and nature. But the potential is there that you don't have to do that. The potential is there that you could actually enter this relationship with God in a trusting way and actually start to come to know God by God informing you about God's nature. Wouldn't that be better? Then you have this personal experience of feeling God as you come to know God. See, at the moment we've talked about a lot of things about God, but unfortunately you're still not really feeling many of them, right? So that means that even this whole discussion we've had for 34 hours could end up with you still going away and not having a relationship with God. And that would be very unfortunate. But that's a potential because many of you are still not feeling God yet, so you still don't really in your heart believe that it's possible that God, if God exists, is like the person we're describing. So that's unfortunate. And this is why, wanting to know and love God causes a strong desire to become at one with God in our heart. And if that desire is engaged, as you can see from the desire principles, if that desire is engaged, God's laws satisfy the desire. But if the desire is not engaged, all you'll walk away with from this group is an intellectual concept. That's all you'll walk away with, without your heart really being moved away from this intellectual concept into an actual experience with God. So what we'd like to do is encourage you to develop through your desire an experience with God rather than just being informed about God. See, being informed about God makes you reliant on another person who knows more, or you could even say who you think might know more about God than you do. You don't even know if they do. Can you see that? Because if you have the personal relationship with God, you will know when somebody knows more than God about you do, because you can feel it from them, and you can feel from God that they do. But when you have not entered the relationship with God, you don't know for sure. So if this is the case for many of you still, you don't know for sure that I know more about God than you do. You just think that might be possible given what I talk about. That makes sense? Given what I talk about and how I act in my day-to-day life, it might be possible, but you don't know for certain, right? And the reality is you're not going to know for certain until you actually enter the relationship, that you actually start receiving this love from God. Then you'll know for certain who is in a more loving condition than you are and who is not. And you'll also then know more about God, because God will be informing you about God. Isn't that what we really want in the end? To actually have that direct connection so we're not dependent. We become self-responsible, independent beings, only reliant on the relationship with God to be informed about the universe. Right? So while there's always going to be someone who discovers something about God first, even if they do discover things about God, if you can't feel God yourself, you won't know for certain whether what they've discovered is true. Only God can really inform you of that. Can you see the problem? We can come to group after group after group about divine truth without engaging the relationship with God. And the problem with that is that you still really don't know what you're hearing is true. And you're only going to know if you enter the relationship with God, receive God's love enough to know whether what you're hearing is true or not. Does that make sense to you? So this is a big issue, isn't it, and a problem, and this is an issue we wanted to raise with you before we send you home. We want you to consider that you can continue coming to these assistance groups, you can continue listening to Mary and I discuss divine truth, you know. We can yabber on for years, can't we, about things, and you can still walk away with only an intellectual thought that it's possible without knowing for certain that it's true. And if you don't know for certain that it's true, can you see that it's much more difficult to have a desire to do it? Because you're still really going, well, maybe I should, and maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I'm not convinced yet, right? And what is going to convince you? Well, you know, at some point I'll start yabbering on about mathematical formulas, most of which you can't currently understand, because you've yet to be open to maths as a form of communication. Or I can start even doing what you might think are magical things at some point in the future, given condition changes. But all of that will still not do anything for you. It's actually the relationship with God that is going to confirm the truth of things or not. Can you see that? Now, you can wait until miracles occur, if that's what you want to do, right? But miracles occurring require myself and Mary and others of the 14 in particular to get into conditions that we are still a bit resistive of at the moment. So it may be many, many years before that occurs, right? And some of us might die before then. Is that going to impact your relationship with God? See, you can know for certain tomorrow without me being involved, or you can wait for years and years and years and years until some level of personal experience gets to the point where you're now convinced without yet still having the personal relationship. You can do that. My suggestion is, don't wait. Have the relationship with God, see what it convinces you of. That's our suggestion to you. So this week, if we look at what we've learned, I'm going to ask for your assistance. What is that blank screen? Let's we do it with the mic. We'll do this with the mic so that people who are watching can hear. So Max, if we have the mic.
That's God who's infinite.
God, that's the infinite being God. So, and the very first thing that we need to understand about God is that God has what? No, let's use the mic. Thanks, Rachel.
God has attributes and nature and desires.
Yes, and personality too.
Personality.
Yeah, so we've got God's personality, attributes, characters and desires. Isn't it amazing that an infinite being, if you think about it, would have an infinite personality, nature, characters and desires, and yet we commonly believe that God's like this big grumpy old dad with pretty limited personality, attributes, character and desires. Do you notice that? Yeah. It's just interesting.